They asked what Earth's apex predator was. The answer shattered their reality. Ambassador Eva Rostova took a slow, deliberate sip of her coffee. It was real, dark, earth-brewed coffee, not the synthetic, nutrient-rich slurry that passed for a beverage on most galactic stations. The rich, bitter aroma was a familiar island of calm in the swirling ocean of alien panic that had consumed the diplomatic chamber. She cataloged the physiological stress responses with the detached precision of a field biologist observing a new species. Before her, High Emissary Corrand of the Cthar Dominion, a being whose crystalline form was usually a study in placid geometry, had frozen mid-gesture. His multifaceted body was vibrating at a frequency Eva's internal sensors identified as approximately 73 Hz, a sign of extreme systemic distress in silicon-based life forms. Fascinating. It was a more pronounced reaction than the one she'd witnessed from the Vexian delegate last year. And all she had done then was explain the concept of spicy food. To Corn's right. Index 33 of the Xylos Combine, an insectoid whose normal state was a series of calm, collected clicks, was emitting a frantic staccato burst of noise. The Universal Translator, a device usually capable of parsing everything from subsonic rumbles to complex pheromonal broadcasts, was clearly struggling. It flashed a single, unhelpful word on its display. Contradiction. Contradiction. Recalibrating. Eva made a mental note to send a performance review back to the Xenolinguistics department. And then there was soloist Alicia of the Laminian Chorus, a creature resembling a sentient nebula contained within a mobile grav tank. Alicia, whose species communicated through shifting patterns of bioluminescent light, was currently cycling through a series of discordant, strobing colors that Eva's diplomatic briefing identified as the Laminian equivalent of a full-throated, blood-curdling scream. This was, objectively, a new record for causing an interspecies incident. Her previous best had been explaining the concept of heavy metal music to the peace-loving Felorians. "Did I say something amiss?" Eva asked, her voice a calm counterpoint to the silent cacophony of terror before her. She set her mug down on the stark white table with a soft click, a sound that made all three aliens flinched. It was Corrand who finally broke the vibrating silence, his translated voice crackling with static. "You stated that your species maintains cohabitation protocols with predators." "Well, yes," Eva said, a faint smile touching her lips. The smile, she knew from her briefings, was often interpreted by non-mammalian species as the baring of teeth, a primitive threat display. She found it was best to lean into these little misunderstandings. It saved time. "We call them pets. Dogs, cats. Though cats are less pets and more tiny, judgmental landlords who live in your house rent-free. Some people keep birds, snakes. My brother has a python named Noodles. It's quite affectionate, in a coiling, constricting sort of way." The clicking from Index 33 intensified. The translator gave up entirely and simply displayed a string of error codes. "Predators." Soloist Alicia pulsed, the colors shifting from screaming panic to a deep, horrified violet. "You have domesticated multiple lines of predatory species. And you find this enjoyable?" "I mean, my golden retriever, Bismarck, isn't exactly a fearsome beast," Eva mused. "He's terrified of thunderstorms and once got his head stuck in a cereal box for 2 hours because he smelled the prize at the bottom. But yes, technically, he's a predator. Descended from wolves, you know. Pack hunters. We just bred them over thousands of years to be good at fetching slippers and looking guilty when they steal food from the counter." The three delegates were now huddled together, forming a small, terrified triangle in the center of the minimalist chamber. Their quiet, frantic consultation involved vibrating crystals, panicked clicks, and light patterns that suggested someone was trying to signal for a rescue team. This was going to be a very, very long day. The frantic, whispered conference lasted for what Eva clocked as 6 minutes and 14 seconds. It was a fascinating display of cross-species communication under duress. Corrand's vibrations seemed to set the tempo, a low, anxious thrum. Index 33's clicks formed complex rhythmic patterns, likely conveying vast amounts of data. Alicia's light shifted from horrified violet to a more controlled, but still agitated, series of analytical blues and greens. Eva didn't need a translator to understand the gist of their conversation. It was something along the lines of, "What in the seven hells of the galactic core have we gotten ourselves into?" Finally, they broke their huddle. High Emissary Korin stepped forward, his crystalline form attempting a composure that was betrayed by the faint tremor running through his body. "Ambassador Rostova," he began, his translated voice now overly formal, a clear sign he was reading from a script they had just hastily concocted. Perhaps we could take this opportunity to discuss Earth's ecosystem in more detail. For the official cultural exchange records, you understand. A complete picture is vital for mutual understanding." Eva leaned back in her chair, a gesture of casual openness that she knew would be interpreted as the preparatory posture of a predator about to pounce. It was all about managing expectations. "Of course, High Emissary. I'm an open book. What would you like to know?" Index 33 moved forward, its multiple eyes swiveling to focus on her with unnerving intensity. "Clarification request. Your planet's apex predator. We wish to understand the dominant biological entity at the pinnacle of your world's food chain hierarchy, for comparison and classification purposes." "Oh, that's an easy one." Eva grinned. The translator dutifully noted, facial muscles retract to expose teeth. "Common predator, threat display. Intent unknown. Assume aggressive confidence." She let the silence hang in the air for a moment, savoring it like the last sip of good coffee. She watched their expectant postures. Korin was rigid and waiting for data. Index 33 was poised to analyze. Alicia was, pulsing with cautious curiosity. They were expecting her to name some great beast, a monster of legend, a creature of fang and claw that humanity had, through its civilized intellect, managed to contain or avoid. Their naivete was almost touching. Most species that reached for the stars did so from a place of harmony, their world's ecosystems of delicate balance. They had never known the brutal, bloody-minded drive required to claw one's way to the top of a planetary death scramble. Eva met their collective gazes and delivered the single word that would shatter their carefully constructed reality: humans. The silence that fell upon the room was a physical thing. It was heavier than a neutron star, colder than the vacuum between galaxies. The previous screaming and panicked clicking felt like a pleasant memory compared to this profound, leaden quiet. It was the sound of three highly advanced civilizations simultaneously crashing into a paradigm they had never conceived of. It was the sound of an entire galaxy's worth of assumptions turning to dust. It was the beautiful, terrible sound of a penny dropping in a crypt. Soloist Alicia's containment field went completely dark for a full 3 seconds. A neurological reboot, Eva suspected. Index 33 ceased all clicking, its limbs locking into place as if its central processing unit had encountered a fatal logic error. High Emissary Korin actually cracked. A tiny, hairline fracture appeared on his left shoulder facet with a faint ping that was deafening in the stillness. Eva took another sip of coffee. "Problem?" she asked. "I beg your pardon?" Soloist Alicia's voice, when it finally returned to the translator, was a faint whisper of light, a pale, quavering aqua. The three delegates had, without conscious thought, moved their chairs back from the table. It was a subtle, almost imperceptible shift, but to Eva, it was as clear as a formal declaration of retreat. They were re-establishing a safe distance. "Humans," Eva repeated, enunciating the word with relish. "We're the apex predators on Earth. Top of the food chain, king of the hill, a number one. I mean, we don't do much active predation anymore. Not since we invented grocery stores and online food delivery. It's far more efficient. But evolutionarily speaking, we're it." She leaned forward, placing her elbows on the table, and was pleased to see all three of them tense up. "We're not the strongest, not by a long shot. A grizzly bear could tear me in half. We're not the fastest, a cheetah could outrun our ground cars. We don't have venom, or natural armor, or claws worth mentioning." She held up her hand, wiggling her fingers. "What we have are these." She touched her thumb to her index finger. Opposable thumbs, nature's own cheat code, allowed us to create tools. And with tools, we didn't need to be the strongest or fastest. She continued, her voice taking on the cadence of a professor giving a favorite lecture. "We're persistence hunters. That's our core biological advantage. Most predators on our world are ambush hunters or sprinters. They rely on a quick burst of speed. They overheat quickly. Humans? We can't sprint for long, but we can jog. For hours. For days, even. Our ancestors would literally chase animals across entire continents, just jogging along at a steady pace, never stopping, until the prey collapsed from sheer exhaustion. We didn't outrun them, we outstubborned them. The aliens remained silent, their horror mounting with every detail. Then there's the social aspect. Eva went on, warming to her topic. We're pack hunters. We communicate, we coordinate, we set traps, we use flanking maneuvers. And we throw things. That's a big one. Most species can't throw with any accuracy or force. A human can throw a rock hard enough to kill something from 100 feet away. It's a ridiculously overpowered skill when you think about it. And we can adapt to any environment on the planet. Deep oceans, scorching deserts, frozen tundras, disease-ridden swamps. If there's a place, we've figured out how to live there. We'll eat almost anything that doesn't eat us first. And some things that do. She took another sip of her coffee. This stuff, she said, holding up the mug, is a mild neurotoxin produced by a plant as a defense mechanism. We liked the way it made us feel, so we domesticated the plant, and now we drink the poison for energy. It helps me think faster. This new piece of information seemed to land with a particularly heavy thud. How many of you are there? Corinth finally managed to ask, the words brittle. Humans? Eva did a quick mental calculation. Roughly 8 billion, last census. Give or take a few million. We're not great at keeping precise track. If the previous silence had been heavy, this one was a singularity. The very fabric of the room seemed to bend under the weight of that number. 8 billion, 8 billion. Apex. Predators. Index. 33 stated. The clicks coming out slow and deliberate, as if each word was a separate, terrifying calculation. Who have achieved interstellar travel. Alicia pulsed, her light now. The faint, sickly color of a dying star. And who weaponized plant-based neurotoxins for recreational use. Corin finished, sounding like someone who had just looked over the edge of a cliff and realized the cliff was looking back. Eva blinked. Is that bad? We're generally friendly. Mostly we want to trade, share culture. Music, art, that sort of thing. I brought some chocolate chip cookies if anyone wants to try one. She gestured to a small, sealed container on the table. The mention of food, of human food, caused a fresh wave of panic. Corin's facets seemed to dim. Index 33's limbs retracted slightly. Alicia's light pattern dissolved into a chaotic swirl of what Eva's briefing notes called deep-seated existential alarm. The cookies are homemade, Eva added, trying to be helpful. My grandmother's recipe. It won a blue ribbon at the state fair 4 years in a row. That did it. Corin made a sound like a pane of glass fracturing under immense pressure. Index 33's translator began to emit a thin wisp of smoke, and soloist Alicia's colors devolved into what could only be described as a full system crash. Perhaps, Corin said, his voice shaking. We should take that recess now, to process this rich and valuable cultural information. Eva found a comfortable chair in the observation lounge, a grand, curved space with a single, massive window that looked out upon the star-dusted tapestry of the nebula. The view was spectacular, a celestial nursery of blues, purples, and incandescent pinks. It was a place designed to inspire awe and humility. She found it was also an excellent place to work on the Galactic Times weekly crossword puzzle. She'd been stuck on 17 across for 10 minutes. The clue was a 6-letter word for a ritualized, non-binding declaration of intent. Treaty fit, but it felt too simple. She was just penciling in facade when the conference room doors hissed open. The emergency session had lasted exactly 47 minutes. Eva knew this because she had timed it while contemplating the philosophical implications of 42 down, an 8-letter word for a container that is also. The thing contained. The 3 delegates emerged looking as if they had just been subjected to a forced evolutionary leap. High Emissary Corin's crystalline structure was now covered in a fine network of stress fractures, like a pane of glass that had been tapped one too many times with a hammer. Index 33's translator was making a faint, high-pitched whining sound, the mechanical equivalent of a migraine. Soloist Alicia had settled on a single, uniform color that Eva's diplomatic tablet helpfully identified as deep cosmic dread. It was a surprisingly popular color in diplomatic circles. Ambassador Rostova. It was Korand who spoke, his voice carefully modulated to betray no panic, which, of course, betrayed all of the panic. We have consulted with our respective home worlds regarding your revelations concerning human nature. Eva looked up from her puzzle, feigning mild surprise. Find anything interesting? Your species file? Index 33 clicked, its voice strained, was initially compiled by our xenobiology intern cadre. Their analysis focused primarily on your cultural transmissions and artistic expressions. Poetry, music, abstract mathematics. Oh, Eva said, setting down her stylus. Let me guess. They saw the symphonies and the sonnets and figured we were basically a species of space hippies with remarkably good infrastructure. Soloist Alicia pulsed a color of pure, distilled embarrassment that needed no translation. An equivalent assessment was made, Korand admitted. The updated intelligence reports, cross-referenced with data from our military and historical archives, paint a somewhat different picture. He seemed to be reading from a holographic projector embedded in his forearm. Did you know that? Your species has a documented history of persistence hunting that spans several million standard years. Sounds about right, Eva confirmed cheerily. We're very goal-oriented. Including, Index 33 added, consulting its own, frantically compiled report, the practice of pursuing prey across continental landmasses for weeks at a time, until the target organism expires from pure physiological exhaustion. Marathon running started as training for that, Eva offered. We just made it competitive and added corporate sponsorships and brightly colored shoes. The three delegates exchanged another look. This one a complex tapestry woven from threads of horror, disbelief, and a dawning, terrible understanding. There is more. Soloist Alicia pulsed, the colors shifting rapidly. Our ecological surveyors have analyzed your planet's biosphere. It shows clear, undeniable evidence of large-scale species manipulation. You have engaged in selective breeding programs on a planetary scale for millennia. Entire food webs have been fundamentally altered to suit human dietary and aesthetic preferences. We like to customize, Eva agreed. Dogs used to be wolves. We made them smaller, friendlier, and better at fetching. Cows used to be wild aurochs. We made them fatter and more docile. Wheat used to be a tough, unappetizing wild grass. We engineered it into the foundation of our entire agricultural system. We see potential, and we optimize. It's a bit of a hobby. Hobby. Korand repeated the word as if it were a particularly vile obscenity. Well, more of a biological imperative at this point. Eva corrected herself. We can't really help it. Show a human an inefficient system, and we'll spend the next few centuries figuring out how to make it better, usually by making it bigger, faster, or more delicious. She was genuinely starting to enjoy this. It wasn't often she got to see the galactic community's elder statesmen have real-time epiphanies about humanity's more alarming evolutionary successes. According to our updated intelligence, Index 33 clicked, its voice now possessing a slight tremor. Humans have successfully established permanent, self-sustaining settlements in every major biome on your home world. This includes regions that, according to our models, should be physiologically uninhabitable for your base biology. Antarctica is lovely if you like penguins and cutting-edge particle physics research, Eva said. The Gobi Desert is great for solar farms. We've got cities at the bottom of the ocean, research labs carved into the sides of active volcanoes, and at least one privately funded resort orbiting inside our gas giant's upper atmosphere. If a place exists, a human has probably tried to build a house there. Your species, Korand stated carefully, as if handling a live explosive, appears to treat lethal environmental challenges as recreational activities. Eva considered this for a moment. Well, we do have this thing called extreme sports. People pay good money to jump out of perfectly good aircraft, climb frozen waterfalls, surf waves that could crush a small freighter, and hike through jungles where the plants are actively trying to kill you. Some folks consider a vacation where you don't risk mortal peril to be a bit boring. Soloist Alicia began to glow with a color that looked suspiciously like a cry for help. Which brings us, Index 33 said, steering the conversation with The grim determination of a pilot flying into a black hole. To the reason for this follow-up consultation. Eva raised an eyebrow. Oh, our governments, Corin announced, have expressed certain reservations regarding humanity's full integration into galactic society. Given your species' documented history of aggressive environmental adaptation, obsessive competitive behavior, and the systematic, planetary-scale optimization of all biological systems. You're worried we're going to optimize you, Eva stated, not asking. The thought, Corin admitted, had occurred to us. Eva laughed, a genuine, hearty sound that echoed slightly in the Grand Lounge. The reaction from the delegates was immediate and predictable. Corin's crystalline structure seemed to absorb the sound, dampening it like an acoustic tile. Index 33's multifaceted eyes all blinked in rapid, unsynchronized succession. Alicia's light flickered, as if a sudden solar wind had just passed through her nebula. Look, Eva said, her tone shifting from amusement to a more placating, diplomatic cadence. I get it. From an outside perspective, human history looks less like a steady path to civilization and more like a series of escalating dares. But we're not interested in conquering the galaxy or turning your home worlds into our personal theme parks. Honestly, we have enough trouble managing our own planets. We just want to trade, explore, maybe open a few good coffee shops in neutral territory. The whole aggressive expansion phase of our development mostly ended a few thousand years ago. Mostly, soloist Alicia pulsed hopefully. Well, we still compete, Eva conceded. But it's largely economic now. And in sports. Lots and lots of sports. We found that if you don't give humans a structured way to compete, we get weird and start having existential arguments about the designated hitter rule or the proper way to load a dishwasher. It's better for everyone if we just keep score. The delegates conferred again, a much shorter, more intense huddle this time. Nevertheless, Index 33 announced, its clicks now sharp and decisive. Our governments feel that a practical demonstration of human adaptive capabilities would be educational for establishing baseline parameters for future diplomatic relations. Eva raised an eyebrow. A demonstration? Nothing dangerous, Corin assured her, a little too quickly. A simple test of adaptive problem solving. It is a standard protocol for evaluating a new species' potential for integration into complex, multivariable galactic systems. Eva had been in the diplomatic corps long enough to recognize bureaucratic doublespeak for, we want to see what you can do without actually asking. This was going to be either deeply uncomfortable or utterly hilarious. Probably both. And this test would involve a controlled environment scenario, Alicia pulsed, multiple variables, limited resources, a defined objective under temporal pressure. Nothing that should pose a significant challenge to a sophisticated, spacefaring species. The way Alicia's colors subtly wavered on the word sophisticated suggested this was not entirely accurate, right? Eva said, a slow smile spreading across her face. And if I refuse? Oh, you are certainly free to decline. Index 33 clicked smoothly. Though it might, regrettably, delay the final approval of the proposed trade agreements. Bureaucratic procedures, you understand. They could take months, perhaps standard years, to work through the proper channels without a complete capability assessment file. Eva sighed. This was exactly the kind of passive-aggressive diplomatic maneuvering that made her miss her old job teaching high school biology. At least when teenagers wanted to make your life difficult, they had the decency to be direct about it. Fine, she said. One demonstration. But I want it noted in the official record that humans generally prefer written exams. We have entire educational systems built around the art of the multiple-choice question and the 5-paragraph essay. Noted, Corin replied, though his tone suggested this information was being filed under irrelevant but amusing cultural eccentricities. The testing facility was 3 levels down, behind a series of airlocks and blast doors marked with hazard warnings in at least a dozen languages Eva didn't recognize. The chamber itself was vast, easily the size of a Terran football field, and clinically sterile. A complex maze of barriers, platforms, and strange-looking obstacles littered the floor under the flat, white glare of high-intensity lights. Banks of sensor equipment lined the walls, all pointed inward. It was overlooked by a shielded control booth, where her three new favorite diplomats were now settling in. Standard survival scenario. Index 33's voice crackled over an intercom. The objective is to reach the extraction point on the far side of the chamber within 30 standard minutes. You may use any of the provided resources. The environmental conditions may fluctuate. What's the catch? Eva asked, stretching her arms over her head. Catch. Alicia pulsed innocently from the booth. There's always a catch, Eva said, her eyes scanning the chamber. Is the floor electrified? Variable gravity fields? Is there something in here that's going to try and eat me? A brief pause from the control booth. The environment may become challenging as the scenario progresses, Corrin admitted. Nothing life-threatening, of course. But conditions will change too. Test adaptability. How challenging are we talking? Another, longer pause. Finally, Index 33 spoke. The last three species to attempt this scenario requested emergency extraction within the first 10 minutes. And what were they? Highly advanced. Technological civilizations with sophisticated problem-solving capabilities and extensive, formally documented survival training protocols. Right, Eva nodded. She shrugged off her diplomatic jacket, folded it neatly, and handed it to a hovering service drone. Guess we'll see how it goes. She was halfway to the chamber's entrance when she stopped and turned back to the observation booth. Quick question. Do you all have robust contingency plans in place in case this goes badly? Badly? How? Corrin asked, his voice laced with sudden nervousness. Oh, you know, Eva said casually. Equipment failures, unexpected cascade effects. The kind of thing that happens when you design a test for species who think survival scenario is a controlled academic exercise, and then you spring it on a representative of a species whose ancestors spent 2 million years treating every single day like a survival scenario. The frantic, silent conversation that erupted in the booth was a joy to behold. The safety protocols are very comprehensive, Index 33 finally assured her. Good to know. Eva grinned. Be right back. The chamber door sealed behind Eva with a soft, definitive hiss. For a moment, she stood still, letting her eyes adjust as the environment began its programmed shift. The flat, white light of the observation room dimmed to a murky twilight. The temperature dropped a sharp 15 degrees, and from somewhere in the labyrinthine structure ahead, she heard the low hum of machinery spooling up. Eva took a slow, deep breath, tasting the recycled air. It was sterile, filtered, lacking the organic complexity of a real planetary atmosphere. She took inventory. The maze of obstacles was a mix of vertical walls, horizontal platforms, and what looked like pressure-sensitive floor panels. The scattered resources were a curious assortment. There was a standard Class G emergency survival kit, a disassembled hydrospanner, several lengths of conductive cable, and a container of what looked suspiciously like nutrient paste. The extraction point, a glowing green panel, was visible on the far side of the chamber. 30 minutes on the clock. It was a classic escape room puzzle, designed by a committee of beings who likely believed that logic was the only tool required for survival. This was going to be FUN.IN the observation booth. The three delegates leaned forward, their respective sensory organs fixed on the monitors. She is assessing the initial obstacle, Corrin observed, his voice a model of analytical calm. Standard. Procedure. She will likely attempt to utilize the hydrospanner to bypass the first barrier's locking mechanism. Negative. Index 33 clicked, its translator having been hastily repaired. The hydrospanner is incompatible with the barrier's alloy. A deliberate misdirection. The logical solution is to use the conductive cables to create a bypass circuit for the pressure plates. Her thermal signature is remarkably stable. Alicia pulsed, her light a calm, scientific blue. No signs of elevated stress. Commendable. Emotional control. On the main screen, Eva walked past the first barrier. She didn't even glance at it. She also walked past the hydrospanner and the cables. She strode directly to the Class G emergency survival kit, knelt, and popped it. Open. She seeks the multi-tool, Corrin noted with satisfaction. A logical, if predictable, first step. Eva ignored the multi-tool. Instead, she took out the emergency medical scanner, a device designed to provide detailed biological readings. She turned it over in her hands, felt its weight, and then, with a sharp, practice twist, snapped the casing open. What is she doing? Alicia pulsed, her blue light flickering with confusion. That is a delicate piece of diagnostic equipment. Eva began methodically disassembling the scanner with her bare hands, extracting a small, dense gyroscopic stabilizer and a series of high-tensile metallic struts. She set them aside and turned her attention to the kit's emergency flare gun. She emptied the flare cartridges, then used one of the struts she'd just liberated to pry the launching mechanism out of its housing. Error. Index 33 stated flatly. This behavior does not correlate with any known problem-solving matrix. She is destroying her resources. Is she? Corin murmured, a sliver of crystalline doubt entering his voice. Eva now moved to one of the chamber's sensor arrays, a panel mounted on a nearby wall. She tested its mounting bracket, found it unsatisfactory, and with a grunt of effort, ripped the entire array off the wall. Alarms, which were clearly not part of the intended test, began to blare. She's dismantling the testing facility. Alicia shrieked in a flash of frantic color. Stop the test. I do not think we can, Corin said, his voice faint. The emergency shutdown requires a 2-minute cycle, and she appears to be building something. On the chamber floor, Eva was a whirlwind of terrifyingly practical activity. The sensor array's parabolic dish became a base. The struts from the medical scanner were being lashed together with the conductive cables, forming a long lever arm. The gyroscopic stabilizer was now a pivot point, and the spring-loaded mechanism from the flare gun was being integrated into a trigger assembly. She worked with the focused, efficient movements of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. She wasn't solving their puzzle. She was building her own solution from the broken pieces of their assumptions. By the founders, Index 33 whispered, its analytical clicks slowing to a crawl. Is that a kinetic energy transfer system? A torsion-based projection device? It's a catapult, Corin stated, the simple, archaic word hanging in the air like a death sentence for their worldview. She built a medieval siege weapon out of our advanced diagnostic and sensor equipment. Eva gave her improvised device a final adjustment, tested the tension on the cables, and then stepped onto the parabolic dish. She clipped a safety line. She'd fashioned from the emergency kit's rappelling cord to her belt, aimed her body toward the distant green extraction panel, and gave the observation booth a cheerful wave. Time remaining? Index 33 asked, its voice barely a whisper. 26 minutes, came the automated reply. With a loud twang that vibrated through the chamber, the flare gun's trigger mechanism released the tension in the cables. The lever arm whipped forward, and Ambassador Eva Rostova was launched through the air in a graceful, terrifying arc. She sailed over barriers, bypassed pressure plates, and soared above the carefully designed maze that had so thoroughly defeated 3 other advanced civilizations. She landed with a practiced roll on a platform near the end of the course, unclipped her safety line, and jogged the final few feet to the extraction point. The green panel chimed in victory as she slapped it with her hand. The facility's main alarms continued to wail. In the booth, the 3 delegates stared in stunned, profound silence at their monitors, which now showed their test subject casually examining the extraction point's emergency reset button with what looked like genuine engineering curiosity. The intercom crackled to life, broadcasting Eva's calm, cheerful voice. That was fun. So what's next? Got anything harder? The silence in the observation booth stretched for exactly 12 seconds before Index 33's translator began, making a series of sounds that could charitably be described as mechanical distress. It was a high-pitched, warbling keen, like a dying modem. Did she just? Corin began, his voice a ghost of its former authority. Build a siege weapon out of a standard medical kit and launch herself across our state-of-the-art adaptability. Assessment chamber, as if it were a recreational activity? Yes, Alicia pulsed, her light a dim, defeated shade of gray. Yes, she did. On the monitors, Ambassador Rostova was now closely examining the extraction point panel. She had apparently located the chamber's emergency maintenance override and was reading the instructional schematic with the kind of intense focus that suggested she was seriously considering whether to press it, just to see what would happen. The facility-wide alarms, triggered by her unauthorized disassembly of the sensor arrays, continued their monotonous wail. Should we establish communication? Index 33 clicked weakly. Definitely, Corin said, a newfound urgency in his voice. Before she decides to optimize our testing facility's power grid. The intercom crackled to life. Hey, control booth people? This whole setup is pretty neat. Is it modular? Because I've got some great ideas about reconfiguring the obstacle matrix for three-dimensional problem solving. It would be much more challenging. The three delegates looked at each other with expressions that conveyed several volumes of raw, undiluted panic. Ambassador Rostova. Alicia pulsed, her voice strained. Perhaps we could discuss your performance in a more formal setting. Sure thing. Just let me document this real quick. Through the monitor, they watched as Rostova produced a standard diplomatic datapad and began taking detailed pictures of her improvised catapult. My niece is studying engineering back on Earth, and she is going to love this. We've been working on a project involving kinetic energy transfer and improvised launch systems. This is fantastic practical data. Your niece, Corin repeated carefully, is studying siege warfare? Mechanical engineering, but yeah, there's some overlap. She's building a trebuchet for her senior project. We've been video calling about trajectory calculations and counterweight ratios. I am coming up, Rostova announced cheerfully. Unless you want me to test out the backup scenarios. I saw at least 3 other configurations in the chamber's maintenance manual when I was borrowing the access panel. That won't be necessary, the 3 delegates shouted in near-perfect, panicked unison. 5 minutes later, Eva Rostova walked into conference room 7, looking slightly dusty but otherwise completely unbothered. She was carrying several pieces of their multi-million credit testing equipment. She placed them on the polished white table with a metallic clatter. I hope you don't mind, she said, gesturing to the components. I wanted to show you some of the design vulnerabilities in your sensor array. The mounting brackets are excellent for standard operational parameters, but they're not designed to handle lateral stress loads. A few simple modifications to the alloy composition, and you could probably increase the failure threshold by at least 30%. The delegates stared at the disassembled technology, then at Eva, then back at the technology. You took apart our testing equipment, was all Corin could manage. Just the redundant parts, Eva assured him. Everything vital is still functioning, I think. But this coupling mechanism right here, she pointed to a small, intricate component that looked as if it had been extracted with surgical precision, is a classic stress concentrator. It creates a point of weakness. It's great for normal use, but it's a liability if someone needs to repurpose it in a hurry. Repurpose it. Index 33 clicked. Sure. I needed a fulcrum point with specific load-bearing characteristics for my catapult's pivot arm. This was perfect once I bypassed the safety interlocks, which, by the way, are ridiculously easy to disengage if you understand the underlying mechanical principles. You might want to have your engineers look at that. Eva pulled out her datapad and, to the delegate's mounting horror, started sketching what looked like improved engineering diagrams. See, your designers assumed that anyone using this equipment would follow the manufacturer's guidelines. But in a genuine survival situation, manufacturer guidelines are more like gentle suggestions. The important thing is to understand what each component can do, not just what it's supposed to do. She showed them a diagram that seemed to have been drawn by someone with a doctorate in turning everyday objects into weapons of mass convenience. For example, this scanner module. It has a beautifully crafted gyroscopic stabilizer that makes an excellent, low-friction pivot. And these power cells, she held one up, their energy capacity is rated far below their actual potential, probably for liability reasons. But it means you've got a lot more potential energy to work with than the manual suggests. Soloist. Alicia had now turned a color that Eva's tablet identified as existential questioning of all prior assumptions. How did you ascertain all of that? Corin asked weakly. Basic mechanical engineering, Eva said. Plus, humans have a compulsion for deconstruction. It's how we learn. Show us a sealed black box, and we will spend weeks trying to figure out what's inside, even if we don't actually need to know. It drives our scientists mad, but it's great for reverse engineering. She flipped to a new page on her tablet. Also, on a more philosophical note, your testing scenario has some fundamental design flaws. It's based on the assumption that the test subject will approach the problem linearly, that they'll follow the intended solution path. That is not how adaptive problem-solving works. Index 33 asked. Not for humans, anyway, Eva replied. We see a maze, we don't think. How do I navigate this maze? We think, how do I eliminate the maze as a factor? She pulled up a simple flowchart. Human problem solving tends to follow this pattern. 1. Identify the actual goal, not the perceived one. 2. Identify and then pointedly ignore all assumed constraints. 3. Optimize for efficiency, which usually means finding the most direct path. 4. Adapt existing resources to new, unforeseen purposes. The maze wasn't the problem. The maze was just a mildly inconvenient piece of physics standing between me and the solution. So you built a catapult, Corin said, still sounding stunned by the simple, brutal reality of it. I built a bespoke kinetic energy transfer system with a predictable trajectory profile. Eva corrected him gently. The fact that it aesthetically resembled a catapult was a delightful bonus. Though I have to admit, it was immensely satisfying to use. There's something deeply, primally enjoyable about launching yourself over obstacles instead of tediously navigating through them. Very efficient, minimal energy expenditure, and it gets you where you need to go fast. The delegates were now staring at her with a look Eva was beginning to recognize. It was a cocktail of 1 part fascination, 2 parts horror, and a generous topping of terrified respect. Ambassador Morgan, Alicia pulsed carefully. Would you mind if we asked some additional questions regarding human problem-solving methodologies? Sure, Eva said, taking a seat. Fire away. 6 hours after Ambassador Rostova finished her coffee and wandered off to discuss sustainable vegetable cultivation with the Dominion Agricultural Council, Priority Alert Omega-7 was broadcast simultaneously to 17 different star systems. Commander Brixtel of the Cthar Dominion's Strategic Analysis Division stood before a holographic display that was rapidly becoming a cascading nightmare of diplomatic emergencies. Except they weren't emergencies in the traditional sense. There were no declarations of war, no border skirmishes, no collapsing trade treaties. Instead, every indicator on his board was flashing variations of urgent cooperation request, immediate technology consultation required, and, most alarmingly, existential problem-solving partnership proposed. Status report, he called out. His voice a low rumble that usually commanded immediate silence. Today, it was nearly lost in the frantic hum of his analysis team. Sir, Lieutenant Corix replied, his own crystalline structure showing a faint sheen of stress. We are receiving concurrent, Priority 1 communication requests from 43 different species councils. All of them are directly related to the diplomatic incident involving the human ambassador. Incident? Brixtel repeated flatly. Is that what we're calling it now, Lieutenant? Sir, the ambassador didn't technically violate any protocols or break any equipment that couldn't be easily repaired, Corix amended hastily. She simply demonstrated capabilities that were not present in our initial assessment files. Brixtel strode through the command center, the holographic reports swirling around him like a data storm. Trade overtures from species that had been staunchly isolationist for centuries. Technology-sharing proposals from guilds that famously guarded their patents with lethal force. Military consultation inquiries from powers that considered their own doctrines to be infallible. Lieutenant, Brixtel growled. What, precisely, happened after Ambassador Rostova left the testing facility? Well, sir, she attended her scheduled luncheon with the Dominion Agricultural Council. She discussed something called companion planting and symbiotic soil nitrogen cycling. According to the Dominion's preliminary report, which they have just shared with every government in this quadrant, she may have provided a viable framework for solving the food security crisis that has plagued their entire sector for the last 500 years. Brixtel stopped dead. She solved their 5-century-long famine over lunch. Apparently so, sir. The Dominion representatives are requesting immediate, top-level consultations with Earth's agricultural specialists. Their projections indicate that adopting human farming techniques could increase their core crop yields by 300% across 7 different planetary ecosystems. The main holographic display shifted again, a fresh wave of incoming communications lighting up a whole new section of the galactic map. There is more, sir, Lieutenant Corix continued, his voice strained. The Xylos Combine's engineering core wishes to discuss human construction methodologies. Something about structural redundancy principles and catastrophic failure point analysis. And the Laminian Chorus, They are requesting urgent medical consultations. Ambassador Rostova apparently mentioned something called preventive healthcare and systematic disease eradication protocols. The Lemnian Medical Council believes this approach might revolutionize their entire philosophy of population health management. Brixton marched to the tactical assessment station, where his chief analyst was surrounded by data streams that were updating faster than any organic mind could possibly process. Chief Analyst Morax, he barked. Current threat assessment on this humanity. Morax, a Kthar whose crystalline facets were usually a model of perfect, unruffled clarity, looked up with the expression of a being who had just attempted to solve an equation where all the variables kept changing into different, more confusing forms of mathematics. Sir, he said, his voice tight, I am going to have to request the authorization of an entirely new classification system. Explain. Human capabilities do not fit our existing threat matrices, sir. They are not militarily aggressive, but they are proving to be catastrophically helpful. They are not conquest-oriented, but their ambassador is systematically solving systemic problems that have defined entire civilizations for millennia. They don't seem to want territory, but they keep offering solutions that could fundamentally reshape the galactic balance of power. Morax pulled up a three-dimensional model of the new diplomatic requests. It looked less like a map and more like a supernova of interconnectedness, with Earth at the very center. Sir, humans appear to operate on the core principle that any problem can be solved with the correct application of methodology and resources. Not some problems, or most problems. Any problem. And based on the data we are now receiving, they appear to be correct about this. That is a logical impossibility. Yes, sir. That is what our models also concluded. But the humans have provided historical documentation of systematically solving challenges their own species once considered impossible. Planetary climate control, near total resource scarcity elimination, large-scale genetic disease eradication, environmental restoration of critically damaged biomes. Commander, they treat each challenge not as a permanent state, but as a temporary, inefficient system awaiting an upgrade. And this is normal behavior for their species? According to their public educational records, yes, sir. They teach systematic problem-solving to their young. They hold competitions where juvenile humans voluntarily attempt to solve complex engineering and logical challenges for entertainment. They consider relentless innovation to be a basic life skill, like navigation or respiration. Brixton turned back to the communications station, where his staff was now fielding incoming requests with the kind of organized panic usually reserved for impending asteroid impacts. Communications, what's our current request queue looking like? Sir, in the last hour we've received formal requests for human consultation on interstellar energy distribution grids, atmospheric processor efficiency, zero-waste management protocols, urban planning optimization, high-speed transportation network design, interspecies communication latency, and something called conflict resolution through the establishment of mutually beneficial, superordinate objectives. All from today, all from the last 60 minutes, sir. Word is spreading through the diplomatic networks like a wildfire. Every government with a long-term, unsolvable problem is now trying to get on Earth's schedule. Brixton walked back to the central display and stared at the cascade of cooperation requests. It was a strategic contagion, an invasion of solutions. Chief Analyst, he said slowly. In your professional opinion, what is the projected outcome if we fully integrate human problem-solving capabilities into existing galactic systems? Morax consulted his data streams. Sir, based on current projections, we are looking at an era of unprecedented progress. Systematic efficiency improvements across all major sectors. Near total resource optimization. Accelerated technological advancement. A dramatic reduction in conflicts arising from resource scarcity. And the downside? Sir, Morax said, his voice hushed. I'm not sure there is one. Humans appear genuinely interested in mutual benefit arrangements. Their proposals are structured as partnerships. They are not asking for exclusive rights or territorial concessions. They want to share information. Brixton nodded slowly, a monumental decision solidifying in his mind. The old ways of thinking, of seeing every emerging power as a threat to be contained, were obsolete. Humanity wasn't a threat to be contained. They were a resource to be cultivated, an advantage to be secured before anyone else did. He made a decision that would later be referenced in galactic history texts as the moment the old galaxy died and a new one was born. Communications, he commanded, his voice ringing with newfound purpose. Send a priority alpha message to Earth Command. Tell them the Cthar Dominion would like to discuss comprehensive cooperation agreements, technology sharing, resource optimization, a full strategic partnership. Any specific timeline, sir? As soon as possible. And, Lieutenant, he added, tell them we are prepared to offer full diplomatic integration and mutual defense. Agreements in exchange for preferential access to their problem-solving methodologies. Lieutenant Corix looked up from his station, stunned. Sir, what should we tell the other 43 species requesting human consultation? Commander Brixtel smiled, a strange and unsettling sight on a Cthar. It looked like rocks grinding together to form a new mountain. Tell them to get in line. Ambassador Eva Rostova stood alone in the observation lounge, watching the silent, majestic ballet of interstellar traffic. Ships from 100 different worlds glided through the station's approach lanes. There were sleek Vidian commerce, vessels, bulky gnarl freight haulers, and the elegant, solar-sailed ships of the Siren poets. It was a beautiful, peaceful scene. Her datapad buzzed for the 7th time in 10 minutes. She glanced at the screen. 3 new communication requests, all flagged with urgent priority, from the Glypton Theocracy, the Silicon Technate, and something called the Grand Conglomerate of Sentient Fungi. Her diplomatic calendar, once a model of orderly predictability, now looked like a star chart that had been hit by a gravity wave. It was chaotic, overwhelming, and utterly thrilling. The doors to the lounge hissed open, and the 3 delegates she had so thoroughly traumatized earlier that day entered. Their approach was different now. There was no arrogance, no condescending formality. They moved with a new kind of deference, a quiet, profound, and deeply terrified respect. High Emissary Corin's stress fractures had been sealed with some kind of crystalline resin, but the memory of the cracks remained. Index 33's translator was silent and still. Soloist Alicia's light was a steady, humble shade of cobalt blue. Ambassador Rostova, Corin began, his voice a low, respectful rumble. He inclined the upper third of his body in a gesture of formal deference rarely seen outside the highest echelons of Cthar society. High Emissary, Eva acknowledged, with a nod. Gentle beings, I trust your consultations were productive. Our governments have received our reports. Alicia pulsed, her light soft and even. They have also received unsolicited but welcome proposals for cooperation from the Dominion, the Combine, and the Chorus, all citing your input as a primary catalyst. There has been, Index 33 clicked, a significant, galaxy-wide paradigm shift in strategic priorities within the last 4 standard hours. Our predictive models are struggling to keep up. Sometimes the best way to predict the future is to build it, Eva said simply. The 3 delegates exchanged a look that conveyed a complete and total acceptance of this new, terrifying reality. They had spent the past few hours realizing that they weren't dealing with a simple diplomat. They were dealing with the harbinger of a new age. We have been instructed, Corin said formally, to bypass all preliminary diplomatic protocols and move directly to a formal proposal. I'm listening, Eva said, turning to face them fully. Our respective governments, Alicia pulsed, formally request the establishment of comprehensive cooperation agreements with the Terran Alliance. To include, but not be limited, to technology sharing, resource optimization, and full strategic partnership. Index 33 stepped forward. We wish to learn your problem-solving methodologies. We are prepared to offer unprecedented access to our archives, our markets, and our research facilities in exchange. Eva allowed a small, genuine smile to grace her lips. It was no longer a threat display, it was a welcome. That sounds like an excellent place to start. She picked up her datapad. I suggest we begin by having your teams compile a comprehensive list of your most persistent, long-term, and fundamentally insurmountable challenges. The older and more impossible, the better. The delegates looked at each other. The very concept was alien to them. Insurmountable problems weren't solved. They were managed, mitigated, and endured. We will begin immediately, Corin said, his voice filled with a new emotion that sounded remarkably like hope. As they turned to leave, ready to begin the monumental task of cataloging their civilization's greatest failures, Eva looked past them, through the great window, and out at the endless sea of stars. She thought about the future, not as a series of battles to be won or territories to be conquered, but as a vast, endlessly fascinating landscape of wonderfully inefficient systems, beautifully complex paradoxes, and magnificently impossible problems just waiting to be solved. Her data pad buzzed again. A message from her niece back on Earth. The Trebuchet project had been a success. She'd won first prize in the state science fair. The message included a short video of a watermelon being launched with terrifying accuracy across a football field. For a species that got bored so easily, Eva thought this new galaxy was going to be a very, very interesting place.